Archaeologists have uncovered many fascinating insights about our ancient ancestors in recent years, but not all of these findings are easy to explain. Significant gaps remain in our understanding of the customs and traditions of past civilizations, gaps that become especially clear when we encounter artifacts or discoveries that defy interpretation. Explore this collection of recent mysterious finds and decide for yourself what they might mean. In May 2021, archaeologists in Istanbul, Turkey, excitedly began the process of excavating the historic Hydropasha train station. They were hoping to find some relatively recent artifacts. Instead, they found something far more ancient. Hidden beneath the station's old waiting platforms is an as-yet unidentified ancient structure. Research is ongoing, but at the moment, the experts believe that the structure was built about 2,300 years ago. It's apsidal in form, which implies that it might be an ancient temple, but doesn't confirm it. After expanding the dig, archaeologists found coins and pottery from the same era, spread over an area of 350,000 square feet. This was once part of the ancient port city of Chalcedon, also known as the Land of the Blind, on account of the fact that its founders chose to build it here rather than on the stunning Golden Horn Peninsula opposite it that later became Byzantium. Since it was a port city and busy with trade, it could be that the structure was a warehouse rather than a temple. More digging and more research are required before we reach any conclusions, and that process might take up to 3 years. We start in the Turkish town of Harran, where this medieval medicine bottle was discovered in February 2019. If you're wondering how the archaeologists responsible for the discovery worked out that the earthenware artifact is a medicine bottle, the answer is that there's still medicine inside it. Experts believe the bottle to be around 900 years old. It's extensively decorated on all sides, including an image of a pair of entwined snakes. That's a medical symbol which is still in use all over the world today. Turkish historians say that the bottle was likely made during the time of the Zengids, who ruled the Levant and Upper Mesopotamia in the 12th century before being replaced by the Ayyubids. It's impossible to specifically identify the medicine inside the bottle, but the discovery of the artifact makes historians increasingly certain that Harran was an important medical center all those centuries ago. Far more medicine-related artifacts are discovered here than tend to be discovered within the limits of the average ancient Turkish settlement. The area is now on the UNESCO Temporary Heritage List and may eventually be promoted to full World Heritage status. We're off to the Dingle Peninsula of County Kerry in Ireland now, where a 3,000-year-old tomb was accidentally discovered by workmen in April 2021. The workmen were carrying out land improvements on a farm when their mechanical digger pulled up a large slab, revealing the tomb beneath it. Archaeologists say that the tomb hadn't previously been disturbed since the day it was sealed. Inside the tomb is a strange oval-shaped stone, the like of which hasn't been found in a burial from this era before. This is a chamber tomb and was probably intended to house several burials, but only one set of human remains was identified inside it. The polished stone was placed directly beside the person who was buried here in what was presumably a significant act. The design of the tomb has striking dissimilarities to other Bronze Age Irish tombs too, including the fact that it's positioned north to south, rather than the usual east to west. The presence of the stone and the atypical orientation of the grave imply that there was something special about the person buried inside it, but we'll probably never know what that special something was. This ancient seal is believed to be a whole 9,000 years old and was found inside a burial mound in Mersin, which is a city on Turkey's south coast, in 2018. The mound is called Yamukti Mound and was already well known to archaeologists at the time of the discovery. Seals of this type are thought to have been a way of denoting private property. The geometric patterns on it may have had a symbolic meaning, but it's also possible that they're just a form of decoration. It was found during an excavation project that lasted 2.5 months and also turned up an obsidian arrowhead and a collection of sling stones. That may indicate that the person buried within the mound was a warrior or soldier. Seal discoveries of this age have been made before, but they're extremely rare, and finding one in such good condition is an even rarer event. Sadly, we don't know much about the culture that created it, not even their name. Of all the ancient sites in the world, Stonehenge in Wiltshire, England, has been studied more than most. That's why it was a surprise when new discoveries were made there in February 2021. A road tunnel is scheduled to be built close to Stonehenge soon, so archaeologists are surveying the area before the work begins. While doing so, they've located a 4,500-year-old burial ground and strange enclosure. The graves are thought to be occupied by the Beaker people, so named because they buried their dead with pottery drinking vessels. The most complete grave is that of a woman who passed away in her 20s and was buried with the usual beaker, but also a copper needle and a shale cylinder that might once have been part of a club or staff. The unusual enclosure the archaeologists found is made up of a series of ditches to the south of the graves. The ditches were created about 1,000 years after the last of the burials, though, and are full of burned flint for reasons that the archaeologists can't even begin to guess at. It's possible that the buried Beaker people were involved in the construction of Stonehenge, but the presence of these younger ditches might indicate that the site was still used for ceremonial purposes several centuries later. We now move to China for a discovery that took place in January 2022. If you've been watching this channel for a while, or even if you just have a keen interest in archaeology, you've probably seen battle armor made from almost every material imaginable, from teeth to coconut shells. However, you probably haven't seen armor like this before. It's been labeled fish scale armor, and it's approximately 2,500 years old. The name is a little misleading, as the armor found inside the tomb in Tor Fun on the edges of the Taklamakan Desert isn't actually made of fish scales. Instead, it's made of more than 5,000 overlapping scales of leather, arranged in a pattern to make them look like fish scales. Experts think that it was imported from the Middle East, and so might represent a rare form of technological exchange between the two territories at that point in history. Armor like this would have been useful because it offers better protection from blunt force attacks than mail armor, and is also cheaper to make, but it lacks flexibility and coverage. There's a cave in the Yucatan Peninsula that's covered in red and black handprints that were left on the walls around 1,200 years ago, and nobody knows why. It's reasonable to assume that the handprints were left by the Mayans, but beyond that, everything is guesswork. From studying the individual handprints, researchers have concluded that they belong to about 130 different people. The size of the prints might hold a clue. It's likely that all of them belong to children between the ages of 10 and 13, the age of puberty. Based on this, a new theory was put forward in May 2021 that proposes that the cave was a focus of ritual activity. The black prints represent the end of childhood, and the red prints celebrate the arrival of adulthood. The ritual activity theory is supported by the fact that there's a ceiba tree at the cave's entrance. The Mayans held these trees to be sacred, and so the cave would have been seen as a special place. It's a convincing theory until you consider that there are no other examples of these handprints anywhere else in former Mayan lands. Maybe there are other caves out there waiting to be discovered. Archaeologists have been digging through a site in Fürstenfeldbruck, Bavaria, Germany, since 2021. One of the most fascinating things they've found there so far is a well. It's not any old well either. It's a 3,000-year-old wishing well. The well is 17 feet deep and lined with wood. Right at the bottom of it, perfectly preserved, is a collection of ritual deposits that date back to the Bronze Age. The deposits, as the name suggests, were placed into the well on purpose. The goods include 70 decorated cups, bowls, and pots of a kind usually associated with grave goods. Each was individually wrapped and gently lowered into the well with great care, meaning that many of them were fully intact. Other goods recovered from the bottom of the wishing well included metal spirals, animal tooth pendants, and bronze clothespins. Most of the finds, though, are coins. Historians aren't sure whether the coins were thrown into the well for good luck, or because the people of the era understood, on some level, that copper and silver had biocidal properties and made well water safer to drink. If you were to visit Abkhazia in the South Caucasus, you'd find hundreds of mysterious ancient dolmens. These dolmens run from here to the Taman Peninsula, and if you counted each one as you passed, you'd be into the thousands by the time you got to the end of the trail. The locals call them ispid, which translates into English as dwarf house. That's an accurate description of their appearance, but it can't have been the intended function of the stone structures. Archaeologists say that the dolmens were made during the Bronze Age, starting about 6,000 years ago and finishing about 4,000 years ago. Each structure consists of just one chamber, made from precisely cut stone blocks and then topped with a slab. Each of them has a porthole, but they can be square, rectangular, or round. Some of the dolmens feature petroglyphs, but many of them are blank. Nobody knows who built them. But candidates include the Koban culture of the Great Caucasus Range, the Klin-Yar culture of the North Caucasus, or the Maikop culture that lived in the West. Not knowing who built them is a pretty big barrier to understanding why they were built. The town of Balmorgan, Northumberland, England is best known for its ancient castle. Compared to this next discovery, though, the castle might as well have been built yesterday. It's a wooden paddle, and it's around 6,500 years old. The paddle was discovered in 2013, buried beneath terrain that's usually wet pasture, but dried out due to that year's unusually dry summer. Next to the paddle, the team found the remains of a platform made from brushwood and a mound surrounded by stones that had clearly been heated by fire. 10 years have passed since this discovery, and experts still aren't sure what to make of it. The paddle clearly wasn't used to help steer a boat, so what was it used for? The heated stone suggests this site was used for cooking, so did the paddle help with that process somehow? Could the activity have been brewing or tanning rather than cooking? Some scholars have suggested that the paddle was used to move hot rocks off the burning mound. But that doesn't get us any closer to knowing why the mound was set on fire in the first place. Just when you think you've seen every possible kind of ancient Egyptian burial tradition, another one appears. In December 2020, archaeologists were surprised to find these so-called cone-head Egyptian burials in the ancient city of Amarna. They're thought to be significant because ancient Egyptian art frequently depicts people wearing cone-shaped headgear, but no evidence of any such headgear has ever been found until now. Prior to the discovery, it was generally thought that they were examples of artistic license, much like halos in early Christian art. Now that we know they're real, we have to try to work out what they mean and why they only appear to have been included in burials in this one city. Does the vaguely phallic shape of the cones have something to do with fertility? Might they have been intended to afford the wearer some kind of symbolic protection in the afterlife? The recent increased focus on archaeology in Egypt has given us plenty of information about the way that its ancient citizens went about their lives there. But finds like these remind us that we have still a long way to go in our quest for full knowledge. We're heading back to Turkey now, where an ancient and primitive musical instrument was found during excavation work in Baykalievler, Anatolia in July 2021. It's thought to be the oldest musical instrument ever found in the country, with an age of around 8,500 years. The discovery came after a local resident tipped off the nearby Bilecik Archaeology Museum about some ceramic pieces that they'd recently found in a field, which prompted a full-scale dig. Professional archaeologists quickly found 11 sets of 9,000-year-old human remains, along with seeds for buckwheat, barley, and lentils, suggesting that these ancient people were accomplished agriculturalists. This bone artifact is believed to be either a whistle or a flute. It has one carefully drilled hole on one side and two more on the other. The presence of holes suggests it has more in common with a modern flute than a whistle. Similar but not identical instruments have been found elsewhere in Turkey before and are known as tuteks. The instrument is too delicate to be played, but experts plan to create an exact copy of it so they can recreate its sound. The history of metal casting in Kerala, India goes back centuries. The precise methods used in the metal casting processes here are never written down. Instead, they're passed on verbally from generation to generation. That means the outside world doesn't understand how a lot of its beautiful artifacts were made. Take, for example, the Aramula Kanadi mirror. It's said that when you look into it, you see yourself as you truly are. That's a mystical way of saying that its front reflection method eliminates the reversal process that happens when you usually look into a mirror. How this has been achieved is unknown. The mirror-making process is another of the region's secrets. Locals say that the mirror was made about 400 years ago inside the Aranula temple, and it's a sacred object, although how true that is open to speculation. Replicas of it are still made to this day, all of which have the same properties. Some of them are of better quality than others, but none will ever distort your reflection. The Indian government has granted patent protection to the mirror, so we'll never find out how it's done unless someone breaks with several centuries of tradition and tells us. Leonardo da Vinci had one of the greatest minds of any human being who ever lived. He was a polymath, perhaps the most gifted multidisciplinarian in history, and came up with new concepts and new ideas throughout his life. Some of the most striking of them can be found in the Codex Atlanticus. This 12-volume set of manuscripts is full of drawings and writings from the mind of the master and is the largest individual collection of his work. Da Vinci considered all manner of things on the pages of this codex, from musical instruments to flying weaponry. There's even a workable design for a parachute contained within the codex. It's thought that Da Vinci worked on the first of the designs in the codex in 1478 and the last in 1519. Also included are a few basic sketches of ideas he had for paintings, complex mathematics, astronomical observations, meditations on philosophy, and a design for a mechanical hydraulic pump. Some of the designs are outlandish, a giant crossbow for example, but all of them were plausible, and in many cases, hundreds of years ahead of their time. On the Scottish island of Orkney, there's a 5,500-year-old tomb that's slowly falling into the sea. Nothing can be done to save it, so archaeologists face a race against time and nature to discover its secrets. Recently, they found two delicately carved and polished stone balls inside the tomb. They don't know why the balls were made, but they join a collection of around 500 of about the same age that have been found all over Scotland during the past century. There are many competing theories about what the stones were used for, but no conclusive answer. Some historians say they might have been fishing weights. Others say that they're projectiles for use in hunting. The lack of flaws or markings on the stones makes both explanations unlikely though. So the idea that they're sacred heirlooms passed on from one generation to another might be closer to the truth. There was a Neolithic settlement nearby at Kata Sand 6,000 years ago, but no balls have ever been found there. The placement of the balls inside the tomb must mean something, but we don't know what. The Bayeux Tapestry is an incredible piece of middle-aged art and tells the story of the Battle of Hastings, which took place in England in 1066. It was the last time that England was ever successfully invaded by an enemy nation. It's considered to be a cultural icon in both England and France, but which side does the design truly belong to, and who made it? Nobody knows for sure, but there are a few clues. One school of thought says that the tapestry is a French design and might have been commissioned for the dedication of Bayeux Cathedral in 1077. Another says that it was made by embroiderers in England somewhere between 1067 and 1092. The first solid record of its existence doesn't appear until it's recorded in the inventory of Bayeux Cathedral in Normandy, France in 1476. That might point to it being French. But the content of the tapestry includes the stories of three English kings, Edward the Confessor, King Harold, and King William. Had it been made by the French, it would surely have focused more on the French side of the battle than the English side. On the other hand, though, its proportions are a perfect fit for the nave of Bayeux Cathedral, which suggests it was specifically made to fit there. It's probably French, but we can't be certain. An American court recently ruled that the Ginnell Stargazer idol can stay in the USA. Now that's been decided, perhaps we can finally get to the bottom of who made it and what it represents. The artifact is approximately 6,000 years old and is one of only 15 Anatolian marble female idols ever to be found. It's thought it was illegally looted from Turkey in 1993 by controversial billionaire Michael Steinhardt. The figure is called a stargazer because of its pose, looking up at the sky with its bulging eyes. It's thought to represent a Chalcolithic-era goddess of abundance, but that hasn't been proven. What we do know is that these figurines were usually smashed as part of a prehistoric ceremony, which is why they're usually found in tiny pieces. The fact that this example escaped that fate just adds to the sense of mystery around it. The fact that it's humanoid but not exactly human-like has long fascinated UFO enthusiasts. It's unlikely that this ancient work of art has extraterrestrial connections, but we'd love to know its real story. We're going back to Turkey yet again, but this time it's to talk about the ancient Romans. The Romans were known to be big fans of board games. They might even have invented the game that went on to become chess. You might have heard of the Roman game Ludus Latron Calorum before, but in November 2024, a different variation from it was discovered in the ancient Turkish city of Kibera. It's called Ludus Dodecim Scriptorium. All that's left of the old game set after 1,800 years in the ground are two game pieces and a square stone board. Its name translates into English roughly as the game of 12 written lines, although where written lines come into it is unknown. In form and function, it's likely to have been similar to backgammon and evolved from an even older Roman board game called Senet. Playing it with a friend would have been considered a fine way of passing the time in the city's agras. It might even still be fun to play if anybody knew the rules, but sadly, they've been lost to time. We know that it once involved 15 pieces and was played with 3 dice, but how the dice drove the movement of the pieces is a mystery. Witch hunts belong to a fascinating but shameful period of British history. They happen all over the British Isles in centuries past, and these artifacts tell us much about how they were performed in Scotland. In September 2021, the collection was assembled and put on display to the public for the first time. They include a set of stone charms, said to have been used by a witch to curse her neighbors, and a Gaelic prayer book that belonged to a wizard in the 16th century. Until now, the objects have been hidden in the archives of Aberdeen University. At least 3,800 people were formally accused of witchcraft in Scotland between the 1560s and the 1730s, most of whom were executed after show trials. The prayer book comes with a large key and is a more recent artifact dating to the 19th century that demonstrates that belief in witches and witchcraft continued here long after the trials stopped. Also in the collection is a 15th century spindle whorl, decorated with feather designs. Feathers were associated with healing charms, but could also be used in curses. Most chilling of all are the collection's jugs, iron collars that were attached to the neck and used to secure alleged witches to walls while they were being held. Switching to the topic of the Mayans, the severed head of a Maya maize god was found in Palenque in May 2022. The discovery was made by archaeologists from the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, who were working at a site close to the Usumacinta River in Chiapas. Palenque is already known among historians and archaeologists for having some of the finest ancient architecture and bas-relief carvings from the Mayan period ever discovered. The severed head is made of stucco and had been deliberately deposited in a small pond. Experts on Mayan culture and beliefs think that the pond was intended to replicate the entrance to the Mayan underworld. One of the culture's fundamental beliefs was that the universe was divided into three regions: the sky, the earth, and the underworld, and travel between the three was possible via portals. While this sculpture has been designed to look like a head that's been forcibly severed from a body, it's unlikely that there was ever a full-size statue that it was cut from. Instead, it was likely conceived and built as a severed head, and then mounted on a tripod before being positioned in an east-west position in the hope of stimulating maize growth. In September 2021, archaeologists in China's Sichuan province completed excavation work at the site of 6 newly discovered sacrificial pits in the Xiangsingdui Bronze Age archaeological site. Among the many puzzling items pulled out of the pits is this artifact, which has been described as a sacred bronze tree. It's thought to have been made by the Shu culture, which existed here about 3,200 years ago. The tree had been smashed to pieces, so recovering the separate branches, flowers, trunk, ornamental birds, and solar wheel ornaments took 4 months. The job was made harder because the pieces of the tree had been deliberately disturbed between several layers of ivory. The complexity of the piece is astounding, and its significance is unknown. We know practically nothing about the Shu people because they had no written language. We believe that they worshiped the sun, and that the sun was flown into the sky every morning on the back of a bird. So the birds on this bronze tree might be connected to that belief. That's really just guesswork, though. It's a relic of a culture that we don't understand. And so how could we hope to understand their art? A woman known only as Taputi is thought to have been the first female chemist in Mesopotamia, and might have been the world's first female perfume manufacturer. She was a clever and literate woman, and left some of the formulas for her perfumes behind on a series of 3,200-year-old clay tablets, accompanied by instructions. The partially translated tablets, which also bear Taputi's name, inscribed in cuneiform, were found during excavations in Assur, Iraq, which was once part of Babylonian Mesopotamia. In July 2022, experts recreated Taputi's perfume by following her formula. The language has never been fully translated, but scholars understand enough of it to translate the essential parts of the text. We know, for example, that Taputi used myrrh, horseradish, balsam, calamus, cypress, flowers, and spices to make her fragrances, which she mixed with solvents and then distilled and filtered to create the finished product. Taputi's instructions also suggested working only at night under a full moon and seeking communion with the stars in the sky, but the modern-day experts passed on that recommendation. Unfortunately, nobody involved in the experiments has seen fit to tell us what the perfume smells like. Perhaps it was awful. This mask may or may not be ancient, and may or may not be a hoax. Someone clearly went to a lot of trouble to make it. But did they do so a few decades ago or a few hundred years ago? It was allegedly found close to the Iowa River in Marshall County, Iowa, USA in May 2021, and is now in the hands of local antique expert Frank White. Despite his years of experience and extensive connections, he hasn't been able to find any information about it whatsoever. An X-ray diffraction test has revealed it to be made of 99.8% pure copper, which explains why it's so heavy. But its age remains a mystery. People in North America's distant past did have access to copper, but making a mask like this could have been difficult, and there's no obvious reason for anyone to have done so. The remaining 0.2% of the mask's composition is an unknown material, which deepens the mystery. The pre-Columbian Hopewellian culture has been pegged as a possible source of the mask, but the facial features on it look European. The only thing anyone can agree on is that it's a beautiful mask. Archaeologists in Datong, which is in Shaanxi province in China, recently discovered a cluster of undisturbed ancient tombs. They've been going through the tombs one at a time, but it's what they found in Tomb 113 that's caused the most excitement among the country's experts. The tomb was found to contain dozens of burial goods, including a unique set of terracotta dancers, musicians, and other carefully posed tiny figurines. Prior to the arrival of the archaeologists, the tomb had been sealed since somewhere around the year 480, placing it in the middle of the Northern Wei dynasty. What's so unusual about the burial figurines isn't just how unusual their poses are, but how many of them there are. Behind the figurines we've already mentioned, the team found a further set of earthenware laborers and animals flanked by pottery horsemen and bullock carts. The quality of the collection suggests that whoever was buried in the tomb was somebody of great importance, but there's a curious lack of inscriptions or other identifying material. We'll regrettably probably never know who he was, but the search continues. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching and see you soon.